The Supreme Court chamber fell into stunned silence, a hush so profound it felt as if the very air had been sucked from the room. What had just transpired was unprecedented in modern judicial history, a moment that would echo through the hallowed halls of American democracy for generations. Justice Sotomayor, a titan of the bench, one of the most powerful voices on the highest court in America, had just attempted to silence Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett mid-sentence during oral arguments. But the response Jasmine fired back left everyone in that marble-columned chamber absolutely speechless. This wasn't merely a legal skirmish. It was a clash of titans, a battle for the soul of justice itself. The tension had been building for months, a slow burn of anticipation. Yet no one, not the seasoned justices, not the packed gallery, not even the veteran court reporters, could have predicted the seismic event about to unfold. In a mere 30 seconds, a rising Democratic star, a voice of the people, would challenge the very foundation of how the Supreme Court operates, daring to ask if justice could truly be blind to the lived experiences of ordinary Americans. And Justice Sotomayor's reaction, a mix of shock and dawning realization, would send shockwaves through Washington, D.C., forcing a nation to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and the true meaning of representation. The air in the chamber was electric, thick with unspoken questions and the weight of history. Spectators who had arrived hours early to secure their coveted seats sensed they were about to witness something extraordinary, a pivotal moment in the ongoing narrative of American jurisprudence. Legal scholars in the gallery exchanged nervous glances, their academic theories suddenly confronted by raw, unfiltered reality, while veteran Supreme Court reporters, their pens poised, prepared for what they instinctively knew would be a career-defining moment to cover. This story has everything: power, politics, and two brilliant women going head-to-head in the nation's highest court, a confrontation that transcends legal precedent to touch the very heart of what it means to be heard in a democracy. This wasn't just a legal disagreement. It was a moment when two powerful women, each representing different generations of Democratic leadership, collided in the most public way possible, forcing a reckoning that few saw coming. And what Jasmine Crockett said next, a truth delivered with unwavering conviction, would either make her career or end it forever. If you believe in the power of truth and in the courage to speak it, then join us on this journey. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell, because you won't want to miss a single moment of this political earthquake that has everyone talking. At 43 years old, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett represents the vibrant, fearless new generation of Democratic leadership, a stark contrast to the established order. Her journey began not in the hallowed halls of power, but in the trenches of public service. A Texas native, she burst onto the national scene with a relentless, almost surgical approach to committee questioning and a knack for viral social media moments that resonated deeply with a public hungry for authenticity. Before her meteoric rise in politics, Crockett honed her skills as a public defender and civil rights attorney, fighting tirelessly for those who couldn't afford high-powered legal representation. This experience, rooted in the harsh realities of the legal system, shaped her understanding of how the law, in its cold impartiality, often affects ordinary Americans in profoundly unequal ways. It was this intimate knowledge, this lived experience of injustice, that would prove crucial in today's confrontation, giving her arguments a weight and a moral authority that transcended mere legal theory. Representing Texas's 30th Congressional District, which includes parts of Dallas, she quickly became known for her sharp wit, her uncanny ability to cut through political nonsense, and her unwavering willingness to call out anyone she believed was wrong, regardless of their position or party. Her trial lawyer background meant she was not only comfortable with confrontation but thrived in it, using her formidable intellect to dismantle opposing arguments with precision. Her social media savvy, a modern weapon in the political arena, has made her one of Congress's most followed members, amplifying her voice and connecting her directly with millions who feel unseen and unheard. Throughout her time in Congress, she's gained national attention for her performances in committee hearings, where she's grilled everyone from corporate executives to government officials with laser-focused questioning, exposing hypocrisy and demanding accountability. Her viral moments have made her a favorite among young progressive voters who see her as someone willing to fight the establishment, a champion for the marginalized. She's built her reputation on speaking truth to power, whether that power wears conservative suits or liberal robes, always prioritizing justice over political expediency. In stark contrast stands Justice Sotomayor, at 70 years old, one of the Supreme Court's most influential voices, a figure of immense gravitas and intellectual rigor. Appointed by President Obama in 2009, she made history as the first Latina Supreme Court justice, a testament to her remarkable journey from the housing projects of the South Bronx to Princeton University, then Yale Law School, where she served as editor of the Yale Law Journal. Her legal mind is razor sharp, and she is known for her incisive questioning and passionately dissenting opinions. She doesn't suffer fools gladly, and her presence on the bench commands respect. For over a decade, Justice Sotomayor has been the liberal conscience of the court, writing fiery dissents on critical issues like voting rights and immigration, always pushing for a more just and equitable interpretation of the law. She has maintained the respect of the legal establishment with her direct questioning style, which forces unprepared lawyers to learn quickly and think on their feet. Her opinions often include passionate language about justice and fairness that resonates far beyond legal circles, touching the hearts and minds of ordinary citizens. But today, she wasn't facing a nervous lawyer. She was facing Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a force of nature who refused to be confined by traditional legal protocols. The stage for this epic clash was set by Henderson versus Texas, a crucial voting rights case that held the potential to reshape congressional redistricting nationwide. As a House Judiciary Committee member, Crockett had been granted the rare, almost unheard-of privilege of presenting oral arguments alongside seasoned DOJ lawyers, a move that had already raised eyebrows among court traditionalists and sparked whispers of a publicity stunt. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The court's ruling could either protect voting rights for millions, ensuring their voices were heard, or it could grant states unprecedented power to redraw district lines in ways that would systematically disenfranchise minority voters, effectively silencing entire communities. For Justice Sotomayor, this case represented everything she'd fought for throughout her illustrious career, the very essence of equal protection under the law. For Crockett, it was about the future of democracy itself, a battle for the fundamental right to participate. Neither woman was prepared to back down. Both were driven by an unwavering commitment to their principles, setting the stage for an inevitable collision. For weeks, legal experts had speculated about the unusual arrangement, with some dismissing it as a mere publicity stunt, while others argued it was a necessary evolution in how Congress and the court interact on constitutional issues, a sign of a living, breathing Constitution. Justice Sotomayor, a product of the traditional legal hierarchy, had been publicly skeptical in off-the-record conversations with legal journalists, feeling that the court's dignity required maintaining certain protocols, a reverence for tradition. Crockett, however, had prepared for months, immersing herself in every voting rights case, memorizing precedents, and practicing tirelessly with constitutional law professors. She knew she was entering hostile territory, not just from conservative justices, but potentially from liberal ones who might view her as an outsider, an interloper in their hallowed domain. The stage was set for an epic clash between institutional tradition and generational change, a moment where the personal would inevitably become political. What nobody expected was just how personal it would get, how deeply the fault lines of ideology and experience would run. The Supreme Court chamber buzzed with an unusual energy as spectators filed in for what everyone knew would be a historic session. The marble columns seemed to stand at attention, silent sentinels bearing witness to the unfolding drama, and even a veteran journalist who had covered thousands of oral arguments could feel something different, a palpable tension in the air. Justice Sotomayor took her seat on the bench with her usual composed demeanor, a mask of judicial impartiality, but those who knew her well could detect a slight tension in her posture, a subtle stiffness that betrayed her inner reservations about this unprecedented arrangement. She had made it clear in private conversations that she harbored doubts about allowing a sitting Congresswoman to argue before the highest court. When Congresswoman Crockett entered the chamber, heads turned, a ripple of anticipation spreading through the room. Unlike the typical gray-suited lawyers who usually argue before the court, she wore a deep navy suit that commanded attention without being flashy, a symbol of her quiet power. Her presence alone seemed to shift the energy in the room, injecting a fresh, dynamic force into the staid environment. Chief Justice Roberts called the session to order, and the traditional formalities began, a familiar ritual preceding the unknown. But from the moment Crockett stood to begin her arguments, her voice resonating with a quiet authority, it was clear this wouldn't be a typical day at the Supreme Court. "Your Honors," Crockett began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had spent years in courtrooms, battling for justice. "I stand before you not just as a member of Congress, but as someone who has witnessed firsthand how the issues in this case affect real people in real communities." Justice Thomas leaned forward slightly, an unusual gesture for him during oral arguments, a sign of his unexpected engagement. Justice Alito's pen stopped moving, suspended midair, his usual meticulous note-taking momentarily forgotten. Even Justice Barrett, usually focused intently on her notes, looked up with obvious interest, her gaze fixed on Crockett. But it was Justice Sotomayor whose reaction was most telling, her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a subtle clenching that only those familiar with her body language would recognize. Her fingers drummed once against the bench, a fleeting gesture that indicated clear disagreement, a silent prelude to the storm. As Crockett laid out her argument about the constitutional requirements for fair redistricting, the questions from the justices started coming fast and sharp, a barrage designed to test her resolve. Justice Kavanaugh challenged her interpretation of precedent, attempting to poke holes in her legal reasoning. Justice Gorsuch questioned her understanding of federalism principles, pushing her to defend her position on the delicate balance of power. But Crockett held her ground, unwavering, firing back with case citations and constitutional analysis that impressed even her critics, a testament to her rigorous preparation. This wasn't a politician playing lawyer. This was a skilled attorney who happened to hold elected office, a formidable legal mind in her own right. "Congresswoman Crockett," Justice Alito said with a slight edge to his voice, a hint of challenge, "are you arguing that this court should essentially rewrite decades of precedent based on your political preferences?" The gallery held its breath, a collective gasp of anticipation. This was exactly the kind of loaded question designed to derail an argument, to force a concession. Crockett paused for just a moment, allowing the tension to build. Then a subtle smile touched her lips. "Justice Alito, with respect," she replied, her voice calm and measured, "I'm not asking you to rewrite precedent. I'm asking you to apply it correctly. And nothing about equal representation under the law should be considered a political preference." A few people in the gallery actually gasped at the directness of her response, a breach of traditional courtroom decorum. Lawyers simply didn't speak to Supreme Court justices that way, with such unvarnished honesty. But Crockett wasn't done. As her argument time continued, Crockett began weaving in examples from her own district, stories of voters who had been disenfranchised, communities that had been split apart by gerrymandering, and the real-world consequences of the court's previous decisions, bringing the abstract legal arguments to life. "Your Honors," she said, her voice rising with passion, a powerful crescendo, "this isn't an abstract legal exercise. Every time this court weakens voting protections, real people lose their voice in democracy. In my district alone, that's when Justice Sotomayor struck." "Congresswoman Crockett," Justice Sotomayor interrupted, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade, sharp and unyielding. "This court is not a political forum. We deal with law, not anecdotes." The chamber went silent, a sudden, deafening hush. Even the court's stenographer looked up from her machine, her fingers frozen mid-stroke. Sotomayor continued, her tone growing more stern, her judicial authority on full display. "Your role here is to present legal arguments based on constitutional interpretation and precedent. Personal stories and political advocacy have no place in these proceedings." The rebuke hung in the air like a thunderclap, a public dressing down that left no room for misinterpretation. Veteran Supreme Court reporters later said they had never seen anything quite like it. One of the court's liberal justices publicly dressing down someone arguing for a liberal position, a rare and shocking display of internal conflict. Crockett stood at the podium, and for a split second, it seemed like she might wilt under the public correction from one of the most respected jurists in America. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, the weight of expectation pressing down. Then, Crockett did something that stunned everyone in the chamber. She smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a deferential smile, but the confident, almost triumphant smile of someone who had just been handed exactly the opening she needed, a gift in the midst of adversity. "Justice Sotomayor," Crockett said, her voice calm but carrying throughout the chamber, resonating with newfound authority. "With the greatest respect for this court and your distinguished service, I have to disagree." The collective intake of breath from the gallery was audible, a sharp, collective gasp. Had a sitting Congresswoman just told a Supreme Court justice she was wrong? The audacity, the sheer courage of it was breathtaking. Crockett stepped slightly closer to the podium, her posture straightening, her gaze unwavering. "You said personal stories have no place here. But wasn't it personal stories that shaped this court's greatest decisions? Wasn't it the personal story of Linda Brown that led to Brown versus Board? Wasn't it the personal story of Dolores Gideon that established the right to counsel?" Justice Sotomayor's face was unreadable, a carefully constructed mask, but her knuckles were white as she gripped her pen, a telltale sign of her inner turmoil. Crockett pressed on, relentless. "Justice Sotomayor, your own confirmation hearings were filled with personal stories about your diabetes, about your mother's strength, about how your personal experiences would inform your judicial philosophy. Were those stories irrelevant to your fitness for this court?" The chamber was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming, a low mechanical drone. Even Chief Justice Roberts, usually quick to maintain order, seemed frozen by the unprecedented nature of what was unfolding, a silent witness to history. But Crockett wasn't finished. "Furthermore," Crockett continued, her voice now carrying the full authority of her position as an elected representative, a voice for the people, "I would respectfully remind this court that I'm not just a lawyer arguing a case. I'm a member of Congress representing 760,000 Americans who sent me here to speak for them." She gestured toward the gallery, a sweeping motion that encompassed her constituents, who sat watching, their faces a mixture of awe and pride. "Those people don't have law degrees from Yale or Princeton. They can't cite constitutional precedents from memory, but they know when their rights are being violated, and they elected me to be their voice, even in this chamber." Justice Sotomayor leaned forward, clearly preparing to respond, her jaw set. But Crockett held up a respectful hand, a gesture of polite but firm interruption. "Your Honor, if this court believes that the lived experiences of American citizens are irrelevant to constitutional interpretation, then perhaps it's time to ask whether this court is still connected to the people it serves." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't yet exploded, a profound challenge to the very legitimacy of the institution. A sitting Congresswoman had just questioned the Supreme Court's connection to the American people, directly to Justice Sotomayor's face. Chief Justice Roberts finally found his voice, a strained, almost desperate attempt to regain control. "Congresswoman Crockett, please confine your remarks to the legal issues before the court." But the damage was done. In less than 2 minutes, Jasmine Crockett had transformed a judicial rebuke into a fundamental challenge to how the Supreme Court operates, a moment of raw, unvarnished truth. And Justice Sotomayor looked like she'd just been slapped, her composure shattered. What happened next would be analyzed and debated for years to come, a testament to the power of a single, courageous voice. Justice Sotomayor, one of the most experienced jurists on the court, found herself in a position she'd never faced before, being publicly challenged not just on law, but on the fundamental philosophy of judicial decision-making. The justice leaned back in her chair, her dark eyes studying Crockett with an intensity that made several people in the gallery shift uncomfortably, feeling the weight of the moment. When she finally spoke, her voice, though softer than before, still carried decades of judicial authority, a deep resonance that filled the chamber. Congresswoman Crockett, Sotomayor said slowly, her words carefully chosen, are you suggesting that this court's commitment to constitutional law should be subordinated to popular sentiment? It was a loaded question, a trap designed to force Crockett into an impossible position. Say yes, and she'd be advocating for mob rule, undermining the very principles of judicial independence. Say no, and she'd have to back down from her previous statements, conceding defeat. But Crockett had spent her career handling loaded questions from hostile judges and opposing attorneys. She was ready. Justice Sotomayor, Crockett replied, her voice steady and clear, unwavering in its conviction. I'm suggesting that constitutional law that ignores the real-world impact on American citizens isn't constitutional law at all. It's academic theory divorced from reality. The response was so direct, so unexpected, so utterly devoid of legal jargon, that Justice Thomas actually looked up from his notes for the first time in the entire session, his usual stoicism momentarily broken. Crockett continued, pressing her advantage. This court has the power to interpret the Constitution, but the Constitution belongs to the people. When this court makes decisions that systematically exclude certain voices from democracy, it's not protecting the Constitution, it's undermining it. She gestured toward the portrait of Chief Justice Marshall that hung prominently in the chamber, a silent witness to centuries of legal history. John Marshall established judicial review not to create an unaccountable aristocracy of legal scholars, but to ensure that the Constitution remained a living document that protected all Americans, not just those with the education and resources to navigate complex legal systems. Justice Sotomayor's face flushed slightly, whether from anger or embarrassment, observers couldn't tell, but the effect was undeniable. But Crockett wasn't done with her historical lesson. Your Honor, you've written eloquently about how your background as a Latina from the Bronx informs your judicial perspective. You've argued that diversity of experience strengthens this court's decision-making. I agree completely. The compliment seemed to catch Sotomayor off guard, a rare moment of vulnerability. And for a moment, her stern expression softened, a fleeting glimpse of the human beneath the robe. But if personal experience matters for justices, Crockett continued, her voice gaining momentum, why doesn't it matter for the people whose lives are affected by your decisions? Why is your story relevant, but theirs isn't? It was a masterstroke of legal argumentation, using Sotomayor's own judicial philosophy against her position, turning her strengths into a powerful counterargument. Several of the other justices were now paying close attention to the exchange, sensing that something significant, something truly transformative, was happening. Justice Sotomayor straightened in her chair, clearly preparing for a more substantial response, her legal mind already formulating a rebuttal. But before she could speak, Crockett pressed her advantage, delivering the final, devastating blow. Your Honor, I want to read you something, Crockett said, pulling out a small card from her jacket pocket, a simple, unassuming piece of paper that held immense power. This is the oath I took when I was sworn into Congress. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. She looked directly at Sotomayor, her gaze piercing, unwavering. That same Constitution that gives you the power to interpret law gives me the power and the responsibility to speak for my constituents. When you tell me that their stories don't matter in constitutional interpretation, you're not just silencing me, you're silencing them. The chamber was electric with tension, a palpable hum of anticipation. This had moved far beyond a typical legal argument, delving into fundamental questions about democracy, representation, and the very nature of judicial power. Justice Kavanaugh attempted to intervene, a nervous cough, a hesitant suggestion. Congresswoman, perhaps we could return to the specific legal issues. But Crockett turned toward him with the same unwavering confidence, her focus absolute. Justice Kavanaugh, the legal issue is whether American citizens have equal voice in democracy. The constitutional issue is whether this court will protect that voice or systematically weaken it. And the human issue, which I would argue is inseparable from the legal and constitutional issues, is whether the people in my district will have the same political power as people in more privileged districts. Justice Sotomayor had been silent during this exchange, her expression unreadable, but now she leaned forward again, a subtle shift in her posture. When she spoke, her voice had lost some of its earlier authority and carried a note of genuine curiosity, a hint of vulnerability. Congresswoman Crockett, what exactly are you asking this court to do? It was the opening Crockett had been waiting for, the moment when she could shift from defense to offense, from responding to accusations to making her definitive case. Justice Sotomayor, Crockett replied, her voice firm and clear, I'm asking this court to remember that every constitutional principle exists to serve real people living real lives. I'm asking you to consider that when you weaken voting protections, you're not just changing legal precedent, you're changing who gets to participate in American democracy. She moved closer to the podium, her voice growing stronger, a powerful declaration. I'm asking this court to recognize that equal protection under the law is not an abstract legal concept. It's a daily reality for millions of Americans who are counting on you to protect their fundamental rights. Then Crockett did something that would be replayed on news channels for weeks, a moment of raw, unscripted power. She looked directly at Justice Sotomayor and spoke not as a lawyer to a judge, but as one woman to another, a direct, personal appeal. Justice Sotomayor, you spent your career breaking barriers and opening doors. You've shown that excellence comes in many forms and that diversity strengthens institutions. You've proven that someone from the Bronx can sit on the highest court in the land and make it better. The justice's expression had completely changed now, the stern authority replaced by something more human and complicated, a mixture of awe and introspection. All I'm asking, Crockett continued, her voice softening slightly, is that you apply that same principle to the people whose cases come before you. They may not have law degrees, but they have wisdom. They may not cite precedents, but they understand justice, and they deserve to have their voices heard, not just in elections, but in the courtrooms where their fates are decided. Justice Sotomayor sat quietly for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the profound challenge Crockett had presented, her formidable intellect grappling with a new perspective. The entire chamber waited, breathless, to see how one of the court's most formidable intellects would respond to being so directly confronted. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than it had been all morning, a quiet admission. Congresswoman Crockett, she said, you've given this court much to consider. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't a dismissal either. It was something no one in that chamber had ever heard before. A Supreme Court justice acknowledging that she might have been wrong, that her perspective had been broadened. Justice Sotomayor continued, her tone thoughtful. Perhaps the question isn't whether personal stories belong in constitutional interpretation, but how we balance individual experiences with legal principles. The admission sent shockwaves through the legal community, a seismic shift in judicial philosophy. Veteran Supreme Court reporters were already typing frantically on their phones, knowing they were witnessing something unprecedented, a moment that would redefine the role of the court. But Crockett wasn't content with a partial victory. Justice Sotomayor, she said with respect, her voice firm, that balance isn't something you achieve by excluding voices. It's something you achieve by including more of them. And then she delivered the line that would define the entire exchange, a powerful summation of her argument. This court's legitimacy doesn't come from being removed from the people. It comes from serving them. And you can't serve people you refuse to hear. The silence that followed was deafening, a profound stillness that spoke volumes. Justice Sotomayor stared at Crockett for what felt like an eternity, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, nodded. Point taken. Congresswoman, please continue with your argument. It was a complete reversal, a stunning concession. In the span of 10 minutes, Jasmine Crockett had transformed a judicial rebuke into a teaching moment, a powerful demonstration of democratic accountability, and one of the most powerful women in America had just acknowledged that she'd learned something profound, a lesson delivered with grace and courage. As Congresswoman Crockett concluded her arguments and left the podium, the Supreme Court chamber buzzed with an energy nobody had felt in decades, a vibrant hum of excitement and intellectual ferment. Legal reporters were already crafting their breaking news alerts, their fingers flying across keyboards, eager to be the first to report on this historic exchange. Law professors were frantically texting their colleagues, sharing their astonishment and admiration, while spectators in the gallery sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what they had just witnessed, a moment that would forever alter their perception of the highest court. Justice Sotomayor remained on the bench for the remainder of the session, but observers noted that her demeanor had completely shifted. Where she had begun the day with stern authority, she now asked questions with genuine curiosity and engaged with subsequent speakers with noticeable respect for their perspectives. A newfound openness. When Chief Justice Roberts finally brought the session to a close, the usual orderly exit from the chamber became something closer to controlled chaos, a torrent of activity as reporters rushed to file their stories and legal experts huddled to discuss the unprecedented exchange they had just observed. Within minutes, Rutger Crockett v. Sotomayor was trending nationwide, a testament to the power of social media to amplify moments of truth. Legal Twitter exploded with analysis, a flurry of opinions and insights. Professor Lawrence Tribe, a titan of constitutional law, tweeted, "In 40 years of watching the Supreme Court, I've never seen anything like Jasmine Crockett challenging Justice Sotomayor on judicial philosophy. Brilliant and necessary." Conservative commentator Jonathan Turley, known for his critical stance, offered grudging respect. While I disagree with Representative Crockett's politics, her performance was masterful advocacy. The Supreme Court's YouTube channel, typically garnering modest viewership, saw the Crockett exchange rack up over 2 million views in 24 hours, a viral phenomenon. Comments poured in from viewers who had never watched court proceedings before, their voices filled with awe and inspiration. Progressive Democrats hailed Crockett as a hero, with AOC tweeting, "This is fearless representation. Jasmine Crockett spoke for millions rarely heard in marble halls." House Speaker Mike Johnson offered a measured response. "While I disagree with Congresswoman Crockett's position, I respect her willingness to challenge the judiciary. That takes courage." Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries called it a masterclass in constitutional advocacy and democratic representation. Law schools across the country began incorporating the exchange into constitutional law curricula, recognizing its pedagogical value. The National Bar Association praised both women for demonstrating that respectful disagreement between powerful women can elevate constitutional questions, a model for productive discourse. Former Solicitor General Donald Verrilli offered a thoughtful analysis. This wasn't institutional breakdown. It was evolution. Representative Crockett forced the court to grapple with questions about its democratic role that needed asking. Speaking at a Chicago Judicial conference 3 days later, Sotomayor offered her most extensive comments on the event. "Recently, I was reminded that our role isn't to stand apart from the American people, but to serve them. That service requires not just legal expertise, but humility about our perspective limits." The comments signaled a remarkable willingness by a sitting Supreme Court justice to acknowledge influence from congressional criticism, a rare display of intellectual honesty. Legal scholars debated whether the exchange represented a new model for elected officials interacting with the judiciary. Professor Acalamar wrote in The Atlantic, "Representative Crockett treated the Supreme Court as a co-equal government branch rather than untouchable authority. That's more consistent with the Constitution's design." The debate sparked a national conversation about the court's democratic role, appropriate deference levels, and whether the court had become too insulated from the people it serves, a vital discussion for the health of democracy. Law schools reported increased applications, citing Crockett's performance as inspiration, a new generation of legal minds drawn to the fight for justice. Several Congress members announced plans for additional legal education, recognizing the importance of understanding the nuances of constitutional law. The Supreme Court, in a move that surprised many, implemented changes making oral arguments more accessible, including enhanced streaming and simplified explanations. A direct result of Crockett's challenge, Crockett transformed from a rising star to a national figure, receiving over 50,000 emails from all 50 states, a testament to her widespread impact. Speaking requests poured in from law schools and organizations nationwide, eager to hear her perspective. I've heard from teachers showing the video to civics classes, young lawyers inspired to take challenging cases, and citizens who felt someone was finally speaking for them, Crockett said in a CNN interview, her voice filled with quiet pride. Surprisingly, Sotomayor and Crockett developed a respectful professional relationship, a testament to their shared commitment to justice. 3 weeks later, they had an hour-long private conversation at a conference, a moment of profound connection. A source reported, Sotomayor told Crockett, "You challenged me to be better. That's what public servants should do for each other." Legal historians place the exchange alongside other watershed Supreme Court moments, recognizing its significance. Professor Randy Barnett wrote, Representative Crockett reminded the court that its legitimacy depends on consent of the governed. That's not challenging judicial independence. It's defending constitutional democracy. The exchange opened conversations about the Supreme Court's democratic role that would continue long after the case was decided, a lasting legacy. Sotomayor seemed energized, asking more questions about real-world impacts in subsequent arguments. Her judicial philosophy visibly broadened. Crockett, in turn, used her platform to advocate for greater civic education and meaningful engagement between officials and the judiciary, ensuring that the lessons learned would endure. The confrontation represented more than dramatic Supreme Court history. It symbolized profound shifts in thinking about judicial authority, democratic representation, and the relationship between legal expertise and popular sovereignty. By refusing to be silenced, Crockett demonstrated that institutional respect doesn't require deference. By acknowledging Crockett's challenge validity, Sotomayor showed that judicial wisdom includes humility to learn from criticism. Together, they modeled democratic engagement that was both respectful and rigorous, a powerful example for a polarized nation. In an era of polarization and institutional distrust, their exchange offered a glimpse of how officials might disagree productively while strengthening democratic institutions, a beacon of hope. The impact of those 10 minutes would reverberate through American law and politics for years, serving as a reminder that, in a democracy, no institution should be beyond respectful but firm challenge from the people it serves. What do you think about this unprecedented confrontation? Did Jasmine Crockett go too far in challenging Justice Sotomayor? Or did she do exactly what elected representatives should do when they believe judicial authority is being misused? The debate has divided legal experts, political commentators, and ordinary Americans who watch this exchange unfold, forcing a national conversation. Some argue that Crockett showed disrespect for judicial authority and the dignity of the Supreme Court, undermining its sacred role. Others believe she demonstrated exactly the kind of democratic accountability that the founders intended when they created our system of checks and balances, a vital safeguard. This moment raises fundamental questions about how our democracy should work. Should elected officials defer to judicial authority even when they believe that authority is being misused? Or should they challenge it directly as Crockett did, embodying the spirit of active citizenship? The answer may determine how American democracy evolves in the coming years, shaping its very future. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And if you found this story as compelling as we did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're covering all the biggest political moments as they happen, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Because if this exchange taught us anything, it's that in American democracy, the most important conversations often happen when powerful people are willing to challenge each other respectfully but fearlessly. And that's a conversation we all need to be part of.